Tonight, the Assembly of First Nation Special Chiefs Assembly kicks off in Ottawa.
And that's really in the hands of Canada as well, because they have committed to working with us on developing a law that would recognize our services as an essential service.
And Innu First Nation in northern Quebec hopes a recent Supreme Court of Canada decision helps with the constant underfunding of the First Nations police service.
My main goal is to ensure that justice is not denied to our people, and also to ensure that everyone who needs representation does get fair and adequate representation, and that they're heard by the court.
And a grandmother's years of hard work pay off as she graduates from law school. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. It's been a deadly couple of days in Manitoba. The RCMP and Winnipeg Police Service have released reports of 5 deaths in Manitoba in the past 24 hours.
30th, the Kanapawakpa detachment of the Manitoba First Nations Police Service located the body of a 37-year-old male from a request for a wellness check. On December 1st at 10:30 p.m., Portage La Prairie RCMP located a 42-year-old male and 37-year-old female deceased. On December 2nd at 1 p.m., Thompson RCMP were called to a report of a stabbing. A 31-year-old male was transported to hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. In the evening of December 2nd, Winnipeg police located a female in her 20s at the 200 block of Furby Street with serious injuries. The female died after being taken to hospital. Another female in her 20s was charged with robbery and second-degree murder.
Meanwhile, RCMP in Fisher Branch, Manitoba are investigating a motor vehicle collision that saw a woman killed and a man charged with impaired driving. On the evening of Friday, November 29th, RCMP responded to a report of a 2-vehicle collision on Highway 17, 6 kilometers south of Fisher Branch. According to them, a pickup truck driven by a 60-year-old man collided head-on with an SUV with 2 occupants from the Peguis First Nation, a 69-year-old female and a 71-year-old female passenger. The driver was pronounced dead on scene. Her passenger was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The man in the pickup truck was arrested and charged with impaired driving causing death. He was released on a promise to appear in court. No names have been released and no date has been set for the court appearance. A recent Supreme Court of Canada decision may help address the chronic underfunding First Nations police services. That is certainly the hope of the Innu First Nation in northern Quebec that was at the center of this case. APTN News' Kim Sullivan has that story.
The Supreme Court's judgment last week was welcomed by the chief of the Innu First Nation of Chipewyan.
On était content du résultat parce qu'on a mis beaucoup d'efforts pour régulariser cette injustice et le plus haut tribunal au pays vient nous donner raison. Donc pour nous, là, c'est une belle journée là, pour l'ensemble de notre Première Nation.
Between 2013 and 2017, the Band Council of Mastoyash incurred deficit of approximately $1.6 million while establishing and maintaining its police force. The Band Council argued that inadequate funding, as well as the refusal to genuinely negotiate the financial terms of tri-party agreements, constituted a breach of good faith and of honor of the Crown.
Après avoir reçu une première décision défavorable de la Cour supérieure du Québec, notre organisation a porté le dossier en appel. La Cour d'appel du Québec a rendu un jugement unanime en décembre 2022 en faveur de Chipewyan et a condamné les gouvernements fédéral et provincial à rembourser près de 1,6 million à notre gouvernement.
The Government of Canada agreed to pay its share of the damages, but Quebec appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. In a majority decision, the Supreme Court rejected the appeal and ordered the government of Quebec to pay nearly $770,000 plus interest. This battle was primarily about negotiations.
Puis encore aujourd'hui, on doit négocier année après année ou négocier de façon court terme. C'est un horizon de 2 à 3 ans. C'est pas possible de penser là développer un service de qualité avec une vision aussi courte dans le temps. C'est impossible. Donc, ça prend de la pérennité. Pour ça, bien sûr, ça nous prend une prévisibilité à long terme là sur le plan du financement.
For Pierre Simard, Executive Director of the Quebec Association of First Nation and Inuit Police Directors, this resolution will correct past mistakes.
On n'est pas dans la luxure, là. On est vraiment dans le rattrapage pour être capable, dans certains corps de police autochtones, de pouvoir assurer un service 24 heures sur 24, 7 jours sur 7, ce qui n'est pas le cas de tous nos corps de police pour des questions d'effectifs, d'infrastructures et de budget de financement.
The Supreme Court's decision could help communities achieve their goal of having their police forces recognized as essential services.
On dit que la population autochtone dans nos communautés mérite le même professionnalisme, la même sécurité, le même soutien policier. Ben, je pense que ça va de soi. Alors, à partir du moment où un service de police autochtone actuellement, selon la loi, il est comme entre deux chaises, puis entre guillemets, il n'est même pas reconnu comme un service essentiel, ben, à votre question, est-ce que c'est un pas vers la bonne direction? Évidemment.
The chief of the Assembly of First Nations Quebec-Labrador, Ghislain Picard, wants this ruling to reinvigorate a federal promise to table legislation about long-term sustainability.
And that's really in the hands of Canada as well, because they have committed to working with us on developing a law that would recognize our services as an essential service. And to me, ultimately, it's really about, being at par with what exists for the Canadian society as a whole.
Mais je pense que ça va aider aussi là à l'ensemble des autres Premières Nations au pays là qui ont livré là le même niveau de bataille là année après année avec nous.
Gerald Swamp is president of the First Nations Chief of Police. He agrees and said on last week's episode of Nation to Nation,
I think it's going to make a major impact on future negotiations, not only for the Quebec Peace Service, but also all the standalone police services across Canada.
Kim Sullivan, APTN National News, Montreal.
To Ottawa now, where it's day one of the Assembly of First Nations Special Chiefs Assembly. And in her speech to chiefs this morning, the national chief addressed many of the problems the organization currently has with the Trudeau government. But Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak was unable to address divisions that exist within the AFN. This after chiefs voted down a proposed $47.8 billion federal agreement on long-term reform in the child welfare system in October. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
Jack Peach, Hoss Lightning Saddleback, Tammy Bateman.
These are just a few of the names of First Nations people who have died at the hands of police since August. Woodhouse-Nepenak says it is time for the federal government to call a national inquiry into the strained relations between First Nations people and police forces, and time for the Liberals to put forward legislation that recognizes First Nations policing as an essential service.
The ongoing failure of federal and provincial governments to respect First Nations jurisdiction and policing continues to contradict the spirit of reconciliation, and it is costing First Nation lives. So it's time to say once and for all that our First Nation lives matter in this country.
But it is clear divisions remain within the AFN after chiefs soundly defeated a $47.8 billion federal agreement on long-term child welfare reform at a special Chiefs Assembly in Calgary roughly 6 weeks ago. An agreement that was endorsed by Woodhouse-Nepenak herself, the Chiefs of Ontario, and Anishinaabe Aski Nation.
It was so bad. Our youth council members, some went back to their room and cried. Some contemplated about even resigning from the youth council because the AFN space felt so unsafe for us. And to my youth council members, I apologize because it was hard.
With an election and a possible Conservative government on the horizon, APTN News asked the National Chief if she had already been in talks with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre about First Nations issues.
I've had dinner with him and his lovely wife in their home with my husband and I think that that's important to build relationships for First Nations and certainly talk about stuff like policing, that needs to change in this country. And of course, echoing that the relationship that was had by the Conservatives in the past is not acceptable to First Nations anymore.
Special Chiefs Assembly continues in Ottawa on Wednesday. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
You can find much more on day one of the AFN on our website at aptnnews.ca. A First Nation in northern British Columbia says potential unmarked graves have been found at the cemetery of the former Lejac Indian Residential School, about 160 kilometers west of Prince George. First reported by the Canadian Press this week, a search using ground-penetrating radar turned up 23 potential unmarked graves. The area where they were found was pointed out by survivors of the school. Almost 8,000 children from 70 First Nations were forced to attend the Lejac Residential School between the years 1922 and 1976 when it closed. The Nadli Wutan First Nation says there was 39 documented deaths at the school. One survivor called the school a jail for children and said he remembers doing heavy farm work while being denied the food they were growing. Survivors are now determining the next steps. An update now on a story we reported on last summer, where Indigenous leaders in Fort Chipewyan were demanding the federal government clean up and fix a dock in the center of the community. Fort Chipewyan is in northern Alberta and is only accessible by boat or air. Local leaders say the federally owned dock is an important piece of infrastructure during wildfire season, but has now fallen into disrepair. They're also accusing the government of failing to inform them about what they say is cancer-causing contamination at the dock site. The federal government previously denied the accusation, but now the House of Commons Transportation Committee is studying the issue. Leaders from the Métis and First Nation communities at Fort Chip testified December 3rd. Here's Chief Alan Adam.
So now I'm asking, fix it up, because do not let this embarrassment to continue on. It's a black eye for Canada in regards to how you guys treat First Nations communities up north.
The federal and Yukon governments are exploring the feasibility of establishing a naval reserve unit in Canada's north. On Tuesday, Bill Blair, Minister of National Defence, and Yukon Premier Ranj Pele signed a letter of intent to establish a naval reserve presence in Whitehorse. The Royal Canadian Navy will send an advance team to Whitehorse this coming summer. The Feds say this is part of a broader plan to restructure the Naval Reserve and strengthen the Navy's operational readiness in the north. There has been another blow for the Métis National Council. Details on that and more still to come. Welcome back. A Fort Severn First Nation man was injured after fighting off a polar bear while protecting his wife. Anishinaabe Police Services say they were dispatched earlier this morning to reports of gunfire. Police say when they arrived at the scene, they found a dead polar bear and learned an adult male had been taken to the nursing station for treatment. Police say the man leapt onto the bear to protect his wife from being mauled. He's recovering from serious injuries to his arms and legs. During the attack, a neighbor arrived with a gun and shot the bear several times. Fort Severn is the most northerly First Nation in Ontario, near Hudson's Bay. Members of the Métis Nation British Columbia have voted to leave the Métis National Council, effective immediately. On Saturday, the MNBC announced that a vote at a virtual governing assembly showed strong majority of members and leaders were in favor of leaving. In a statement, MNBC President Walter Minot said that despite 40 years of good work, the current MNC structure was no longer equitable. He said leaving the National Council would ensure no outside organization has jurisdiction over their rights. The Manitoba Métis Federation was the first to leave the MNC in 2021. The Métis Nation Saskatchewan left in September of this year. The Métis Nation of Alberta and Métis Nation of Ontario are now its only members. APTN News has reached out to the Métis National Council but did not receive a response. This next story is about a grandmother who has endured a lot of challenges to overcome many obstacles and follow her dreams to become a lawyer. APTN's Tina House has more.
After 8 years in school, it's an exciting day for Métis Benson as she officially graduates from law school and is getting called to the bar.
Métis Benson.
Métis has come a long way to reach this goal, with the odds stacked up against her. Originally from the Chipewyan First Nation in northern BC, Métis and both her parents all went to residential school, and growing up for her wasn't easy.
Every time I thought of quitting, every time I was so exhausted that I couldn't even do it anymore. I couldn't even I couldn't read another sentence. I couldn't study anymore. I always thought, my kids are looking at me, my children are looking at me, the community is looking at me, and I can't quit.
And for over 10 years, Métis has been the voice for her daughter, Faith Alexis, who has been lost to drug addiction and mental illness. In 2020, we brought you a feature story on Faith and Métis' fight to get her daughter into treatment. Faith Rose Alexis was born on March the 8th, 1982, in Bella Coola, BC. Her mother, Métis Benson, was just 16 years old at the time.
Being really young and naive, I just didn't know what I was in for.
Faith grew up and had 4 kids of her own, but after her addictions got really bad, Métis took custody of her grandkids, but has never turned her back on Faith, spending hours walking the streets looking for her daughter and never giving up hope.
Hi, Faith.
Hi. Mom, is that you?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Mom.
Hi, baby.
Hi.
I just feel like she's dead inside. When I go see her and I talk to her, she's just absolutely dead. It's not the Faith that I knew, it's not the Faith that I raised.
And now, 4 years after that story aired, today, Métis is surrounded by her family and friends, including Chief of the Chipewyan First Nation, Chief Karina Lewin, and 2 of her council members, as they proudly leave the ceremony at the courthouse.
Well, Métis is an example of a lot of hard work and determination, sacrifice, all the things that it took her to get to where she is. For anybody out there that's a young student or at any age can accomplish this with, that drive and that passion to succeed, and then be very proud at the end of their journey. Very proud of her.
The single mom who raised her 4 grandchildren on her own while going to school says all the struggles were worth it, and she's proud of her accomplishments.
Being a single parent, going to school, doing articling and studying has taught me a lot of time management skills, resilience skills, and it has also taught me of why I am here today. You know, I am the voice of the people who are voiceless.
Mavis says she plans on specializing in criminal and family law.
My main goal is to ensure that justice is not denied to our people, and also to ensure that everyone who needs representation does get fair and adequate representation, and that they're heard by the courts.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Congrats. Investigative reporter Patty Sontag is our guest on Face to Face tonight. We'll bring you a preview after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Calvin Trout tells us this is near Sioux Lookout, Ontario, and was the first snowfall along the Ignace route early in the morning just a few days ago. Thanks, Calvin. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, -1 with snow in Halifax, 3 below in Fredericton. -18 in Kuujjuaq, 9 below in Nain. -1 with snow in Montreal, 2 below, and flurries in Val-d'Or. Flurries and -1 in Sault Ste. Marie, 0 with snow in North Bay. Snow and -6 in Thunder Bay. Flurries and 10 below in Sioux Lookout. -13 with snow in God's Lake, 16 below in Norway House and the Paw. -14 in Winnipeg, 10 below in Dauphin. -8 and snow in Regina, cloudy and 14 below in North Battleford. -15 in Meadow Lake, 18 below in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, -15 in Fort Chipewyan, sunny and 2 below in Grand Prairie. -3 with flurries in Edmonton, -5 in snow in Medicine Hat. 7 in Vancouver and Victoria, +1 in Kamloops. 3 in Prince George, 6 in Smithers. -24 in Old Crow, snow, and -9 in Whitehorse. Minus 12 with snow in Yellowknife, 23 below, and snow in Norman Wells. Minus 22 in Sax Harbor, 18 below in Paulatuck. Minus 28 with snow in Chesterfield, 29 below in Whale Cove. Minus 27 in Resolute and Arctic Bay. With little movement in the postal strike, Canada Post has removed the deadline to mail a letter to Santa Claus. The program usually delivers as many as 1.5 million letters from Canadian kids to the world's coolest postal code. The initial deadline to get letters to the North Pole was December 5th, but the Crown Corporation has now removed that deadline from its website. It says once operations resume, it will ensure all letters get to the Big Elf and receive a reply, but it cannot guarantee delivery dates. Investigative reporter Patty Sontag has spent months digging into Ottawa's Indigenous Procurement Initiative, a program meant to support Indigenous-owned companies. Sontag is our guest on Face to Face tonight. She says she was surprised as anyone that her reporting led to Randy Boissonnault resigning from cabinet.
By that point, I had been reporting on the program for months, and it really didn't cross my mind, I have to say. I thought that, it's really important reporting. It's really important to talk about how this money is spent and whether it's benefiting First Nations community or First Nations, Métis and Inuit communities. I was surprised as anyone.
And you can catch our entire interview with Patty right here in less than 2 minutes time, as we are all out of time tonight for your APTN National News. Of course, for much more, head over to our website. That's where you can find multiple stories from day one of the AFN Assembly in Ottawa. Day two will kick off Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. You can watch that live on our website or on our APTN News YouTube page. Chiefs and Proxies will be talking child welfare tomorrow. Creason will also have your first look at the day's news, including updates from the AFN in Ottawa at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Stick around. Face to Face is up next. Have yourself a great night.